Hi, folks. Here today talking about expositions, this first part of the plot diagram. It's basically just the beginning of a book or beginning of a story. We got to figure out what goes into an exposition and development of conflict and how we might analyze this and that write it ourselves. So the basic elements of an exposition are broken down kind of into just background information. What do the writers really need to know, or the readers really need to know? And this kind of boils down to, okay, who are the characters? What's the setting? What has happened recently in the past? And what conflict is this building towards, right? And don't feel like you need to answer each one of these kind of bullet points in order sequentially, right? You don't have to tell me everything that happened in the past that led us up to this point in the story. A lot of writers just like to start us and start telling what's happening in this particular moment, and then prior plot events, pieces of settings, pieces of characters will start filtering in as we go through that. So for my visual folks, if you need a flow chart, here's kind of what an exposition is composed of. Setting, both in place and prior events. What characters, what's the conflict, what problem are we going to resolve, and then what perspective is this told from? And I'll give you some options here. So as you're deciding to write a story, you've got to choose who your narrator is going to be, right? Is this going to be a first person narrator? Someone who's using I to tell this story and maybe even experiencing the story? Or is this going to be a third person narrator, the person who uses like he or she or they pronouns? Like they're not an active participant, but they're more like watching it go on by. For your narrative, you're going to use a first person narrator. There is such a thing as a second person narrator that makes you the participant in the story, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's pretty rare in literature and writing in general. All right, so once you have your narrator kind of chosen, there's some even more options about figuring out who your narrator is and what they know. So you have a choice between sort of a subjective narrator and an objective narrator. Subjective narrator is probably what you're going to choose for your. It's what I'm going to recommend that you choose for your personal narrative. And these are good because they give us personal feelings and their own thoughts. They're subjective, meaning they're kind of opinionated and giving what they believe. We have to be careful though, because they're generally unreliable, right? I can't trust one person entirely. Everyone's going to lie. Everyone's going to have their own perspective or their own bias, even narrators in stories. That's kind of versus an objective narrator, meaning that I'm only telling about facts and events. I'm not giving any opinion, any personal opinion of the narrator, right? I could tell you that this character felt this way and this character thought this thing, but I'm not giving my opinion. And then to even further complicate things, we have omniscient narrators and limited narrators. You're probably not going to use an omniscient narrator in your personal narrative. This is more for fiction writing. This is a narrator who knows and sees everything that's going on in the world of the book, right, or the story. Limited narrators is much more common, where we have a particular character who's telling a story and they don't know everything. They're figuring things out as they go. And this could be either first person or third person. Your narrative will be a limited narrator because you're telling me your experience, right? You don't know everything. You have a limited perspective. We all do. Don't feel bad. All right. And then some other thoughts and questions that you might ask of an exposition. Number one, how much does the narrator know, and how much are they going to tell us throughout the story? Do they know everything, and they're kind of reflecting back on this, or are they experiencing it and kind of processing this limited information as it comes to them? Also, is the narrator a participant in the action, or are they just watching it? Right? I could see either one of these coming into play into your personal narratives. Maybe you just witnessed an event and it didn't actually happen to you, but by watching that, it had a profound effect on you. You've got to choose when and where to start this story and why you're starting it then. That's a huge one. Because remember, you only have 5 minutes of action to tell me about. So you can't tell me about your day-long fishing trip. You have to zero in on 5 minutes that matter the most out of that entire day. And then also in expositions, we got to kind of start setting up what the problem is. You don't have to come out and tell me, here's the problem of my story, but you might start to allude to it. About here's the conflict. This is me versus myself in this way, or this is me versus my parents, or this is me versus, nature as I was hiking along this trail. I should start to be able to guess at that conflict. Maybe you haven't fully developed it yet because we haven't hit the rising action or the problems yet, but I should start to have some hints. And then lastly, probably most importantly, why is this story being told? You got to figure out the motivation behind why this is an important narrative to write about. And obviously that's a very personal question. You got to figure out why it's important to you and then figure out a way to write it so it becomes interesting and important to other people as well. All right. So just to kind of recap some background information, for your personal narratives, you're going to use that first person narration, but you've got some choices on everything else. When and where you're going to start it, what background information are you going to include, and how and when are you going to tell the reader about that background information, like the setting and the other characters and maybe even prior events that have happened leading up to this critical 5 minutes. All right. Good luck, folks. Enjoy analyzing expositions. They're fun to write.